Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. The Memphis Grizzlies have benefited a bit this month from playing against teams that have been impacted by COVID, but now it's the Grizzlies with John Konchar engineering health and safety protocols that are starting to feel the crunch of COVID a bit. How that could impact lineups, plus how the Grizzlies draft assets are looking so far this year as they welcome one of the team's draft picks that they own, the Los Angeles Lakers, to the Forum tonight in another very interesting matchup that could impact the Western Conference playoff race. Let's get it going here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome once again to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Hope you are having a relaxing end of the year, though some bowl games are being canceled. You got plenty of bowl games out there to watch. Obviously, NBA basketball to enjoy as well, college basketball as well. Thanks so much for making Locked On Grizzlies a part of your day as your first listen of the day. You can find the show at Locked On Grizz on Twitter, myself at StatsSAC. You can find us on YouTube right here. Hit that subscribe button below, as well as the podcast wherever it's available. Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, free on all platforms. My name's Shawn Coleman, credentialed media member with the Grizzlies. Have been covering the Grizzlies now for over 4 years. Your host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every single day. So when it comes to the Grizzlies right now, as I had mentioned, Memphis has, benefited at times so far this season from playing against teams, especially this month, that have been shorthanded due to COVID. I know both times that they played the Kings and Sacramento over the past few weeks, the Kings have been shorthanded. And so the Grizzlies have taken, the opportunity to get wins that they needed to get due to playing against teams that are shorthanded. Of course, you hope all these players that are involved in COVID protocols are healthy and that they get back to playing as much as possible. But without a doubt, there are some good and bad things when it comes to these COVID protocols. Obviously, it's having an impact on the league where outside of many teams' controls, they're playing many games without their best lineups, without being at their best capacity. And it has impacted some teams' records. Now, again, on the flip side, you are seeing plenty of, encouraging young talents get their first true opportunity in the NBA as a result. Of course, you also have seen some familiar names come back on some of these hardship 10-day contracts. But at the end of the day, the impact of COVID is certainly impacting nearly every team in the NBA. And on Tuesday, the Grizzlies, once again, the impact of COVID on their roster situation became even more impactful as it was announced that John Konchar had entered health and safety protocols. That means now that the Grizzlies basically have 8 players on their injury list right now. You've got Sam Merrill, Santi Aldama, and Zaire Williams, who previously was in health and safety protocols but now is off. He's still rehabbing an ankle injury, but you got 3 of those young players who are out right now due to injury. But then you've got Dylan Brooks, you've got DeAnthony Melton, John Konchar, as well as Yves Pons and Jarrett Culver, who are all in health and safety protocols. Now, obviously, besides Brooks and Melton, none of the players mentioned are really impactful talents for the Grizzlies. Konchar certainly is. But that does show, though, that the Grizzlies now have 5 players in health and safety protocols. And when I say impactful, what I mean is that you've got Melton and you've got Dylan Brooks as being 2 of your top 8 players typically in the rotation. John Konchar is the natural replacement for one of those players if they were to step out. So while the Grizzlies aren't missing one of their, maybe top 3 or 4 players right now outside of Brooks, what they are missing, where they really are starting to fill a roster crunch, is when it comes to their wing depth. Right now, with all the players that are out of health and safety protocols, when you look at the Grizzlies' top 8 or 9 players, you've got John Morant, Desmond Bane, Kyle Anderson, in my opinion, probably steps right into the starting lineup. And then you've got Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams. And then on the bench, you have Tyus Jones, you have Xavier Tillman, you have Killian Tilly. Those players are all serviceable in their roles, but you don't have a lot of wing presence when it comes to the ability to throw out different balanced lineups that could really make the most of the Grizzlies utilizing what Taylor Jenkins wants to do. You have your 2-point guards and John Morant and Tyus Jones. You've got Desmond Bane, as who's your true wing, and you've also got Kyle Anderson, and then you've got a lot of bigs that are out there. Jaren, Steven, Tillman, Clark, Tilly. Those guys could possibly play the three in a pinch, but including Kyle Anderson, basically you've got 2-point guards, a wing in Desmond Bane, and then you've got 6 guys who basically are a bit more, equipped as bigs right now, as 4 and 5s, than you do a true 3. So the Grizzlies roster crunch is certainly being felt in terms of their wings when it comes to COVID. And so this could lead to either some pretty interesting lineups, or it could lead to a few of the Grizzlies' hardship signings that they've made over the past few days stepping up into bigger roles. Now, obviously, one of those names that stands out is Shaq Buchanan. I discussed Buchanan earlier this week when he and Tyrell Terry were signed to their hardship contracts back on Christmas Day. Shaq Buchanan, due to his familiarity in the organization, due to obviously, previous times of playing with John Morant, even though he's not a true wing, you could potentially see him get 10 to 12 minutes in a game because he's probably a more reliable option than a Tyrell Terry or recent signing Xavier Sneed, who could step in, and he has an idea at least of what the Grizzlies are looking to do, so he could get a run of maybe 10 or so minutes in tonight's game and, through the game against the Spurs, on Friday. But obviously you also have Xavier Sneed, who the Grizzlies signed a few days ago, who potentially could get some run as well. Sneed is a 6'5" guard/wing that the Grizzlies signed off of the Greensboro Swarm, which is the Charlotte Hornets G League affiliate. In his G League performances, he was averaging 9.1 points, 4 rebounds, and 1.9 steals in nearly 25 minutes per contest. The thing that stood out about Xavier Sneed this year is that he was knocking down 50% of his field goal shots, as well as 39% of his threes so far in the G League this year. So some really encouraging shooting numbers from Xavier Sneed. But that's the thing that stands out. Again, the Grizzlies are probably not going to go 9, 10, 11 deep with the talents that they have. You may not necessarily see Buchanan or Sneed take on big roles like a Konchar did, stepping up into, a 15 to 20 minute role a night, but you could see, just simply to get some type of roster or lineup balance going, you could see a Buchanan or a Sneed step into a role. But when it comes to the Grizzlies, you also could see some unique lineups. You could see more of a Tyus Jones, John Morant lineup to really emphasize playmaking and ball security. Perhaps those two working off each other to allow for one of them to be in a shooting role while the other handles the basketball. That could be a route the Grizzlies go. Or you could see 3 big lineups where, you have to trust perhaps the perimeter defense of a Brandon Clark or a Killian Tilly at the 3 to support Jaren, Kyle, Xavier Tillman, and Steven Adams, and some variation of those 4 at the 4. You do have some good young talents, some versatile talents that are maybe considered bigs, but can handle their own on the perimeter. But it's certainly going to be interesting to see how Taylor Jenkins juggles lineups moving forward. Obviously, we know that some of his lineup decisions can be questionable at times, but at this point, due to the pieces that he has to utilize, it could get very interesting very quickly. Obviously, it could play to the Grizzlies' strengths, where you have all these big lineups and you're going once again against a team in the Lakers tonight where pounding the paint truly is an avenue to success. But overall, it's going to be interesting to see how well the Grizzlies can defend the 3, how well the Grizzlies can do their own, how well the Grizzlies can find their own success shooting the 3 with some of their better shooters on the roster, and what the Grizzlies will do in terms of their overall ability to defend not only the low post, but the perimeter. Obviously, it feels like that we won't have to worry about this for too long, but over the next few games at least, things are going to get quite interesting, where we could see some non-traditional lineups due to the lack of wings that the Grizzlies have to utilize right now when it comes to their depth. But overall, the big thing to take away is that the Grizzlies have dealt with this for a little bit now. They've been able to win 2 back-to-back games without Melton and without Dillon. And while John Konchar has certainly played a good role in those games, you simply see Kyle Anderson stepping into that starting lineup, in my opinion, and you're probably going to see Ja Bane, Kyle, Jaren, Steven Adams, you're probably going to see those players play 25 to 30 minutes. So overall, what this simply means is that you're probably going to see the Grizzlies go more with a playoff style roster where they're simply going to play their best players more extended minutes over the next few games until they get some of their quality depth back. But there could be short spurts where you could see things get really interesting, perhaps with the Tyus lineup for a little bit, or maybe a 3 big lineup for a little bit. You trust Taylor Jenkins to manage the best possible, opportunities that are there without some of his regular players, regular depth pieces. But again, it's going to be quite interesting to see what lineup combinations could come from the lack of wing depth that the Grizzlies now find themselves with due to players being in health and safety protocols. But another really fun thing to watch, besides how the Grizzlies may juggle lineups over the next few days, is the fact that the Grizzlies are playing the Lakers once again for the third time this year. And every time the Grizzlies play the Lakers, it gets very interesting because there's a certain asset, the 2022 Lakers first round pick that the Grizzlies own. How do those draft assets, how are they looking right now in terms of how the Grizzlies, the Jazz, and the Lakers are playing? We'll discuss that in just a moment. Before we get to that, I want to talk with you again about Truebill. Truebill, you've heard us talk about it many times before. It's the great opportunity for you to be able to manage your subscriptions when it comes to your free trials, when it comes to your online subscriptions, to make sure that the costs you're paying are reasonable. You don't want to have to pay hidden costs due to a free trial becoming something that costs you money. Truebill on average saves its users $720 a month just from alerting the users about free trials becoming unwanted costs. And if you go to Truebill.com right now /LockedOnNBA, you can learn all that you need to know. It's not only a great way to manage your free trials, it's also a great way to manage your subscriptions in general. Check out Truebill.com today. On tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we will certainly break down the Grizzlies game against the Lakers. It's going to be, again, a very interesting one where even though the Lakers are without Anthony Davis, they're going to have LeBron James, they're going to have Russell Westbrook. The Lakers are going to look to score. The Grizzlies are going to certainly have to keep up in their own right as well. We'll review the game against the Lakers from tonight, plus also look a bit more into a few New Year's resolutions. I know I mentioned it for this show, but with what had happened with the health and safety protocols, had to change things up a bit. But we'll look at New Year's resolutions for the roster as a whole and a few players coming up on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So listen, the thing that stands out about the Grizzlies is that they are now 21-14 entering this game against the Lakers. And a thing that I had mentioned at the start of December was that December was going to be a very interesting month when it came to the Grizzlies, because despite the fact that we have more than half the season left, the Grizzlies have played many of the other teams that are in the jumble of the Western Conference playoff picture. At the end of the day, the Suns, the Warriors, and the Jazz are clearly in a tier of their own. I'd put the Warriors and Suns in the same tier, the Jazz in their own tier when it comes to the top two tiers in the West. But after that, the Grizzlies right now are the best of the rest, and they certainly legitimately are with how well they played. But a big reason why they've emerged as that is because they've taken care of business against other teams in the Western Conference, and that includes the Lakers. But with that being said, one of the things that stands out is now with the Grizzlies having been in the position to where it's looking more and more likely the Grizzlies have a very good shot of making the playoffs as a top 6 seed, which means they won't have to worry about the play-in game. We're also now entering the 6-week stretch of the season where it's trade season. Typically in a normal NBA season, once the calendar year turns to the new year, that really starts the clock on trade season. And we're right here with it because with just a few days away from it being 2022. And while we'll have plenty to talk about when it comes to trade talk, speculation, rumors, what have you, one of the things that I think is important to know is how well the Grizzlies draft assets are looking from the play of not only the Grizzlies, but also the Lakers as well as the Utah Jazz. As of right now, the Grizzlies, if the draft were to happen today, the Grizzlies own the Lakers pick, which would be 16th right now in the draft order. The Grizzlies' own pick would actually be 23rd, and the Utah Jazz's pick would be 28. Now, obviously, having picked 16, 23, and 28, if you would have said after the Grizzlies did the Jonas Valanciunas trade at the beginning during the offseason before this season started, if you would have said 2 months ago before this season started that at the Christmas break, the Grizzlies would be lining up to have the 16th, 23rd, and 28th pick in the 2022 draft, I think that that's a reasonable estimation of where the Grizzlies' 3 picks would have been. Because coming into this season, you had the Jazz and Lakers as true title contenders, and you had the Grizzlies as an aspiring playoff team. So you would think that, having a pick at 16, having a pick at 23, having a pick at 28, that would be sensible locations based off the expectations of the Jazz, Lakers, and Grizzlies coming into this season. It's just the fact that it's the Lakers pick that is 16th overall. The Grizzlies picks that's at 23, that is the surprising thing. The Grizzlies having a more successful season so far than the Lakers, I don't think is a thing that many folks thought would be likely. But the Lakers have dealt with injuries, obviously, with LeBron being out earlier this year, now with Anthony Davis being out. They've lost 5 straight games before beating the Oklahoma City Thunder the other night. And so they're now 17-18 on the season. But the reason why it's interesting for these first-round picks to know where they stand is because all along, it seemed very unlikely that the Grizzlies would potentially utilize all 3 of these first-round picks in the 2022 draft. Yes, I and others have talked about the fact that coming into this summer, the Grizzlies are going to have some roster spots to fill. However, filling them with multiple rookies for the third or straight 4th season probably doesn't make too much sense for a team that obviously is aspiring to be a sustainable winner, and it will be hopefully be coming off a season where they're a top 5, top 4 finisher in the West. These picks could certainly be used for trades in the offseason, but this now becomes interesting when it comes to this potential trade deadline season, because with the Lakers pick being in a bit better position than many had anticipated, one of the things that you potentially could see the Grizzlies do is if they don't feel, and you feel that the front office certainly keeps a close pulse on all things that are going on for both present and future moves, perhaps the Grizzlies could use one of their first-round picks in this draft, with those picks being in the latter half of the draft. Perhaps the Grizzlies could use one of those picks in a move to where they can go do a buy low opportunity for a young player in the league right now. One player that especially stands out is Atlanta Hawks forward Cam Reddish. Now, I'm not saying that I anticipate or that I think there's a high chance that the Grizzlies could go after a Cam Reddish or that type of player. But I do feel that the Grizzlies certainly could, instead of trading to Kyle Anderson, instead of trading to Tyus Jones, who the Grizzlies, certainly are getting good value from, if the Grizzlies were not to use one of those players to go get a trade, to go make some type of trade that could impact the Grizzlies in a positive way both now and into the future, one other route the Grizzlies could go with their first-round picks that they have right now, 3 entering the 2022 summer, the Grizzlies could utilize one of those picks in a deal to go get another buy low, especially wing option that I think you could certainly make sense to utilize in the rotation, because you're seeing that the Grizzlies, as much depth as they have, they certainly could use even more, especially when it comes to the wing position. Again, is it likely? I don't necessarily know if that's the case, but you also don't necessarily see an issue with potentially the Grizzlies coupling, a player to maybe a Jarrett Culver or a Sam Merrill or players such as that, taking 1 or 2 of these into the rotation players, not their draft picks, and not John Konchar, for instance, but taking maybe a Culver and a Merrill or some combination of into the rotation players, pairing them with the first round pick and potentially going to get a young talent that right now would come into the roster and probably would be at the end of the rotation, just like a Culver or a Merrill would be, but one that the Grizzlies probably are going to hold in higher regard, that they could either, give run to as the season goes along this year when injuries occur, or at least would be under control for next year when the Grizzlies will need some new rotation players. So that's what stands out. That's what's valuable about keeping up with where these first round picks that the Grizzlies own in 2022 are, because they offer another route that the Grizzlies could go in order to boost their roster not only now, but also moving forward. Is that type of move likely? Probably not. But at the very least, if the Grizzlies could use an expiring contract or two to add to one of their first-round picks from 2022, that could be a sensible way to go do a buy low move to get some type of talent that the Grizzlies find intriguing, like they've done in the past, going after a Justice Winslow, DeAnthony Melton, players such as that. The Grizzlies could do that once again, and even though they may bring in a talent as of right now, would move to the end of the rotation and may not have that big of a role, it could be an intriguing talent that could step up at times this year, but also could be controlled into next year or beyond when the Grizzlies are going to have more holes to fill for their roster. So the benefit of this front office getting multiple first-round picks in this draft is that they have different time frames in which they could utilize those picks. They could do it now in a move such as I'm mentioning, at before the trade deadline. They could add it to potentially a bigger type move where they use a Kyle Anderson or a Tyus Jones to go get a veteran piece that the Grizzlies could look to control beyond this summer, or they could simply hold on to all their assets and make a move during the summer. But the fact that the Lakers themselves have not performed to the level that many had thought, that is an unexpected benefit to the Grizzlies, who truly could use that pick to their benefit. Again, using it now to go get an intriguing piece that, while that piece may not be impactful now, it could be impactful beyond this season. You also could use it in a trade for the Grizzlies to go get a veteran that could upgrade the roster now, plus also beyond the season. Or, again, if the Grizzlies want to hold till the summer and make a trade, they could do it then. Or the Lakers pick potentially being the best or most valuable pick for the Grizzlies in the draft, they could simply hold on to the Lakers pick and work off that to potentially move higher in the draft to get a quality prospect. So that Jonas Valanciunas trade, though differing opinions will have different perspectives on it, it certainly seems to continue to be a bit more valuable for the future than we had initially thought, with how well that Lakers pick seems to be increasing in value. Seems like the Lakers are going to be a team that will be there as the playoffs continue, but as long as that pick stays at 11 or farther in the, or later in the draft, that's a very good asset for the Grizzlies to have that they could utilize in a variety of ways. But of course, the Grizzlies also have a bit of control over continuing to make that pick as valuable as possible when it comes to them facing the Lakers for the third time this season tonight. Though LeBron James and Russell Westbrook are going to be on the court for the Lakers, them being without Anthony Davis could certainly play into the Grizzlies' favor. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But I'll tell you this, another thing that can play to your favor is if you utilize betonline.ag. That's correct. We all know that betting and wagering on sports is a lot of fun, especially this time of year with bowl season going on, the home stretch of the NFL season. Well, if you're someone that enjoys doing that, go check out betonline.ag, the fastest and easiest way for you to be able to bet on all your sports. NFL, NHL, NBA action, all those different sports are going on. And if you go use the promo code Locked On, you'll get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Again, check out betonline.ag today. Listen, the Grizzlies' options, they may be dwindling down when it comes to their wings, but that means that there's some exciting new options that they may not have got the chance to look at before that could step up, like a Shaq Buchanan or an Xavier Need. Well, that same mindset could make Built Bar even more beneficial for you. And the reason why that is you have over 18 different flavors you could choose from at Built.com. And if some of the flavors that you've enjoyed for a while, you're ready for a change, there's plenty of different options to choose from. But also, if you go to Built.com right now, you put in the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. Head to Built.com right now, choose from over 18 different flavors, and put in that promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your next order of Built Bar. I'll tell you one man who certainly is, I don't know if he's necessarily enjoying, I'm sure he is, but one man who is extremely busy right now is Josh Lloyd, because with so many names being unavailable that you normally would rely on in fantasy basketball, Josh Lloyd is the number one source in the world to get an idea of new names that could really, really impact your fantasy lineup. So after you make Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day, check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, the number one fantasy basketball podcast in the world with Josh Lloyd. Make sure you check it out today to get all the latest on your fantasy basketball needs. So once again, LeBron James and the Lakers will be coming to the FedEx Forum to face off against the Grizzlies for the second time this month. And if you go back a couple of weeks ago, the Grizzlies were facing the Lakers after they had a very disappointing loss to the Dallas Mavericks. And it was actually the first time this month that Dillon Brooks was in health and safety protocols after he had got, ejected from the Mavericks game. Then we go into that Thursday. Dillon Brooks, unfortunately, was not able to play due to health and safety protocols. He was only out one game because he was able to come back and test negatively twice in 24 hours. But the Grizzlies were able to still beat the Lakers in what was a pretty significant win to get this team back on track, for them not to be, for them not to get derailed by that disappointing loss to the Mavericks. Well, once again, the Grizzlies are coming into tonight's game against the Lakers in a little bit better scenario, in which they've won 2 straight back-to-back games, including one of their better victories of the season over the Phoenix Suns. The Lakers come into tonight's game. They're at 17-18. They're right now, I believe, in 9th place when it comes to the NBA Western Conference standings. Clearly in the play-in game, but again, they once again are struggling with injuries. The Lakers themselves are dealing with their own players being out with health and safety protocols. Players that have been out for a while, such as Trevor Ariza, Kent Bazemore, other players that, typically would be a part of the Grizzlies, Rajon Rondo and Austin Reeves. While it's no one significant when it comes to the players in health and safety protocols, a few of them have not played for quite a while. The Lakers themselves, just like any other team right now, some of their depth is not available due to health and safety protocols. But of course, the big absence for the Lakers right now is Anthony Davis. And don't get me wrong, both LeBron James and Russell Westbrook are certainly still putting up their numbers. They're certainly capable of taking over a game on any given night. But the impact that they're making is not to the level that we've seen in the past. A 5-game losing streak before they were able to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder 132-123 to bring their record back to 17-18. And the reason why the absence of Anthony Davis could really fall into the Grizzlies' hands is because the thing that the Grizzlies have been able to utilize in order to win the past few games, since they have lost a lot of their wing depth due to being in health and safety protocols, is producing in the paint and second chance points, and obviously getting an advantage on the rebounds. Well, that is the one area that the Lakers struggle in when it comes to facing teams. Not only are they a bottom 3 team when it comes to rebounding on their own, especially on offensive rebounds, they're also one of the league's worst teams when it comes to preventing production from their opponents. They're among the league's worst when it comes to preventing oppositions from getting offensive rebounds. And so once again, as we've discussed, this could be a 3rd straight game where a very good presence from Steven Adams could be absolutely important. If Steven Adams, with Anthony Davis being out, though the Lakers still do have some big bodies they could throw at him, if Steven Adams can step up and once again control the boards, especially on the offensive glass, the Grizzlies could really find a benefit from getting the possession edge in this game to be able to win it, because the Lakers are going to still score, especially with the Grizzlies not having a Dillon Brooks or others to try to defend LeBron James. The Lakers are likely going to have a bit of an easier time to score than they have in recent games against the Grizzlies, especially this calendar year. But the Grizzlies can combat that by getting extra opportunities through offensive rebounds, converting it into second chance points, and pounding the paint. This is a game where, despite the fact that the Lakers bench has performed well at times, this is a game where a guy like a Brandon Clark really could also make a difference in those minutes between the second units. If he can get going and he can score 12, 14, 16 points, that can make all the difference in the world for the Grizzlies to be able to get this victory. So it's going to be a hard task, especially with the Grizzlies missing some of their best defensive pieces when it comes to the wings. The Lakers may have a bit of an easier time finding opportunities to score. But for the Grizzlies, the big focus is just continuing what they found success doing, getting into the paint, producing, at the rim, getting to the free throw line like Jaren Jackson Jr. did over the weekend quite well. That's another thing that could really benefit the Grizzlies, getting the Lakers into early foul trouble by being very aggressive and getting to the lane and getting to the rim. But if the Grizzlies can do that, along with winning the rebounding edge, or along with, winning the rebounding battle, I think that will put the Grizzlies in a very good position to be able to win this game. And if they do, that puts the Lakers at 17-19. It only makes the Grizzlies draft pick that we talked about in the second segment that much stronger. So it's going to be an interesting matchup without some of their best wing talents, I think the Grizzlies may have a bit of tough times at times, especially guarding LeBron James and other Lakers wings. The hope is that the Grizzlies won't miss on their rotations too much and allow a bunch of open threes to the Lakers. But if the Grizzlies can figure out how to be able to defend that three, they can still be opportunistic because the Lakers are one of the most turnover-prone teams in the league. If the Grizzlies can defend the three to the best of their ability, still find opportunities to create some turnovers, but then rely on their size to produce in the paint and especially on the boards, I think Memphis could be in a very favorable position to win this game. Of course, we'll have the latest for you once the game has concluded here on the post-game edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Check out myself at StatsSAC, the show at Locked On Grizz on Twitter. You can find it wherever podcasts are available for free, as well as right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button below. Until next time, it was a pleasure talking with you. Hope you have a great Wednesday. Go Grizzlies, and we'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.